Building trust is hard. And for us, when we came in, we entered in the space at a time where particularly athletes didn't trust anyone, right? And rightly so, right? They had been wronged by their coaches, by people in positions of power and authority, by their entire governing bodies. And so when we opened, it was an uphill battle for us because, we were really closely connected in people's minds to the US Olympic and Paralympic Committee and the governing bodies that had done some pretty shady things leading up to that point.
Have you ever noticed that some of the best ideas come from unexpected places? Your next breakthrough may come from a leader facing similar challenges, but in a completely different sector. Welcome to Chief Influencer. I'm your host, Anthony Shop. Join us as we explore how today's successful leaders inspire, influence, and connect with others. Chief Influencer is a production of Social Driver and the Communications Board, who have teamed up to spotlight how great leaders and communicators are making their impact in the world. This episode is brought to you by the George Washington University's College of Professional Studies. With in-person and online programs, ranging from master's degrees in public relations strategy to certificate programs in digital communications, GW offers more than just the credentials to help working professionals get ahead. It prepares them to be leaders in their field. As a proud GW graduate myself, I can attest that faculty members combine academic rigor with real-world lessons that can't always be found in textbooks. Check out cps.gwu.edu for more information. Juris Colón is the Chief Executive Officer of the U.S. Center for SafeSport, the nation's only nonprofit organization committed to ending all forms of abuse in sport. Before her center tenure, Juris served as National Vice President of Child and Club Safety for the Boys and Girls Clubs of America, developing and leading the child safety policies and initiatives for over 1,100 U.S. Boys and Girls Clubs, organizations, and nearly 4,300 Boys and Girls Club locations. Juris also served as Executive Director of Prevention and Outreach for the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, leading prevention and education programs related to child abduction and sexual exploitation and their delivery to children, families, and the public. An experienced child advocate who serves as an expert on issues related to child safety, Juris has led prevention and outreach initiatives with youth-serving organizations, serving families, educators, law enforcement, and diverse communities. She earned bachelor's degrees in criminal justice and Spanish from Virginia Commonwealth University. Juris, welcome to Chief Influencer.
Thanks for having me.
Now, I'm really excited to have this opportunity for folks to learn about the center, but also to talk about the important work that you've done across your career. One of the things that we could hear just in your bio is the various stakeholders that you've had to serve. And so that's one of the things I want to talk about is how you influence stakeholders that range from the public to, a vast array of folks, especially from a new organization. But to get started, SafeSport's mission is to put athletes' well-being first, above money and medals, and that was born out of a need for reform. So I wondered if you could just start by telling us more about the organization, how it was founded, and the various stakeholders that you have to keep in mind in your role as CEO.
Sure, happy to. So the Center for SafeSport, we were opened in March of 2017. And to rewind time a little bit, that was just a few short months after Larry Nassar was put in jail. And so we were opened as an organization to really address what the nation was finding out that was happening in USA Gymnastics several years ago. And really the organization that was built to do a couple of things, right? One, to really hold organizations and individuals accountable for their actions, particularly when it came to allegations of abuse and misconduct. We also spend a lot of time trying to make sure that we don't ever get to that part, right? Making sure that, one, we have the proper policies in place and proper rules in place, particularly organizations serving youth and athletes, but also developing educational content to help people understand how to recognize abuse, how to respond to it, and to ultimately report it. And, we sit in a really unique spot because we were the first organization of its kind in the world, certainly the first in the United States, and we're built with the notion to really put athletes' well-being first. And when you think about the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic movement in which we serve, there's about 11 to 14 million people that fall into that category, which is a lot of people. So when I think about our stakeholders, it's not just athletes, right? Both young and old. It is also the coaches that they interact with each and every day. It's doctors, it's medical professionals, it's their parents, it's those folks who are making the policy, sitting at the top. All the administrators and everyone in between that floats in and out of sport. And for us, our first priority, of course, is going to be athletes, right? That number one priority, top of the list when it comes to stakeholders. And so making sure that they have the tools and resources they need, but also the trust that they need in order to come to us should they experience a form of abuse, and want SafeSport's assistance in trying to resolve it. But when I think about like my daily, right, in the daily and the in of my team, we're also dealing not only with the athletes and people involved with sport, but we're also dealing with the general public. I spend a lot of my time actually here in DC, dealing with congressional representatives, and anybody else who kind of touches sport, and every one of them wants something different, right? But you've heard the saying, you can't be something to everyone, but you can be. I'm getting it wrong. I think you know what I mean.
Yeah.
But when you think about kind of appeasing stakeholders or making sure that they have what they need, for us, it's a balancing act to make sure that we're always putting athletes first, but also thinking about the implications that it may have on the other people that are impacted by our actions and by sport each and every day, not only in the United States but also globally.
Yeah, when I think about, what you all do as a fairly new organization, you mentioned you were, created after, there was a lot of news coverage of terrible things happening. And probably for most people, they never thought this was a problem. Probably came as a bit of a slap in the face. And you all are there to, address the concerns that are out there, but also to change the culture to, stem this type of abuse from happening in the first place. And you mentioned trust. How do you build trust when you're coming in at this point where people have had this wake up call that, maybe there's a problem out there that they didn't even think about before, and then to establish yourselves as a trusted organization being so new that can help address this problem, particularly for a victim?
Yeah, building trust is hard. And for us, when we came in, we entered in the space at a time where, particularly athletes didn't trust anyone, right? And rightly so, right? They had been wronged by their coaches, by people in positions of power and authority, by their entire governing bodies. And so when we opened, it was an uphill battle for us because, we were really closely connected in people's minds to the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee and the governing bodies that had done some pretty shady things leading up to that point. And so for us, we had to do a couple of things. And it was one, just recognize the space that we were in and that it wasn't going to be a flip the switch. People are automatically going to come to us just because we have the name U.S. Center for Safe Sport, right? We needed to build that trust. And we did that through a couple of ways. I mean, one, it was being just very open, right? Helping people understand that day one, we were building an organization that was meant to stand the test of time. And so, we needed some time and patience also, right, to be able to build up an organization that could be trusted for years to come. But it was also in the quality of our work. And, people had to see that when they came to the Center for Safe Sport that they were getting results and that it wasn't taking them backwards. We weren't putting their needs or their feelings aside, but that we really truly cared. And we struggled with that. We've struggled over the years and getting athletes in particular to trust us because we've had missteps as an organization early on. And we've had to rebuild trust and then rebuild it again and then rebuild it a third time, right? And I think when you think about building trust, it is a constant continuum. And you also have to be able to really own when mistakes have been made, and then be really transparent about how you're going about fixing things in order to build and regain trust with communities. Because trust is really easy to lose, but so very hard to build and to keep.
Yeah, I think someone told me once, trust is kind of like a balloon. It takes a lot of effort to blow it up, and just, one little thing can pop that balloon and you're back at square one. And I think especially when you're talking about issues that just are just so, emotional and so damaging, that makes it even more difficult to build that trust. And so I wonder if you could share some of the things that you're doing to change the culture, so that this work is not even needed at the same level, right? So that you mentioned addressing the problem before it becomes an issue, and I'd just love to hear some of the successes that you've had in that area as you've established this brand and established trust with your stakeholders.
Yeah, I think, one of the things that has worked pretty well, particularly when I'm thinking about building trust, because it's not just trust, right, within people looking inside. It is the people who are doing the work every day, right? They also have to trust that the decisions that I make, the decisions that my leadership team makes are the right ones for the organization. And so keeping my team, which has grown from what I think when we opened, we had 4 people. We've now got about 130. But keeping all of the team just plugged into what we're doing and why is a really big piece of that. And so making sure that we continually host open forums, provide updates on really critical details of what we're doing, but also giving them access to me in ways that go beyond like a general town hall meeting, right? So, one of the things that I did when I first started was to make sure that everyone understood that I had an open door. And that means that if you want to pop into a Teams at that time, you get to pop into my office. And I will always take time for the team to hear out their concerns and their ideas and suggestions because they had many of them. And I took that approach with the governing bodies as well. And so, one of the issues that we had early on was that they just didn't see enough of us, right? Which was understandable because we had a lot of work going on. And so we needed to take time to really have open and honest conversations with governing bodies, but also being able to open up those conversations to athlete groups and the general public. So if a parent calls me and wants to talk about an outcome of their case, I make time to make sure I listen to it. Now, granted, we've gotten over 15,000 or 22,000 reports since we have opened our doors. So taking 22,000 phone calls is almost impossible. But when they do call, to make sure that they feel heard and feel seen, because otherwise people think that things go into a black hole and that we are an organization that's not to be trusted, and that's just not the case.
You have some personal experience taking those types of phone calls, difficult phone calls, don't you?
Yeah, when I first started at the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, I was on their 24-hour hotline. I had the worst schedule available, which was 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. But on those 8 hours every day, I had a chance to talk to parents who were calling me at their lowest, right? Their kids were missing, and or there were images that had popped up online of their children, and they needed someone to talk to, they needed someone to go to, and they needed someone to give answers. So I had some experience there and just dealing with really sensitive topics. But I think back to when I was in college, and I also I did collections for a bank. And I also
Good
got, so
job.
because of that, yeah, I know, right? Did a little bit of everything. But in that, people yelled at me all day long because who wants to get a phone call from a collection agency? But it also helped me just keep my even keel and tone when talking to people, and understand that you don't know where people are coming from. You don't know what they've been going through when you pick up that phone. And so to be able to sort of connect with them, and to also be able to just talk them down a little bit sometimes is super helpful, because it can get stressful, and sport is just full of emotion. I mean, turn on any game of any sport and any season, and you'll see just the passion that that fans come with, and I think that they bring that same passion when they're calling the Center for Safe Sport.
Yeah. You know, this issue obviously has been in the news a lot, and your organization finds itself in the news as a result of that. And, you have people when that happens on both sides. Everybody has opinions about what you can do differently or better. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how you pay attention to some of the positive things, like the word of mouth, where people are talking about, your prevention efforts and your program, and that it's working. And then at the same time, how to know when to respond when someone does have criticism or feedback, and how to filter that out from the noise.
Yeah, it's hard to balance it sometimes, because we get a lot of criticism, and it comes from all areas and all sides. No one is ever really happy that they have to call us in the first place because of the sensitive issues that we deal with. And so, we do get a lot of criticism. And it's important to balance that out and to remember that, we are really making a positive influence, not only in individual athletes' lives, but also in the overall culture of sport. And so when we're able to kind of lean into, positive feedback from parents who've gone through our process, or from survivors who, thank us for being an outlet for them to be able to finally get some answers and some resolution, that really puffs us up, right? But then being able to take all of those learnings, all of the feedback, positive or negative, and put that into the prevention education work, I think is really important for us, because that is where we really want to be able to spend most of our time eventually, right? Helping people prevent that. And so being able to get that feedback and funneling it into education content is really important. But also, sometimes you just got to take it. You got to take the feedback you get. Some of it works, some of it doesn't. And I think as leaders, you have to be able to distill between what is going to help serve you, and then what is just people venting. And sometimes there's a little bit of both, and people need both of those things. But that's probably been one of the things I think, as CEO here, is like you have to be able to hear that feedback, understand that it's typically not personal, even though it may be very heated and passionate, but to be able to kind of take what you can out of every one of those conversations and turn it into something that's helpful and useful for the organization.
Have you learned any techniques that other leaders could benefit from in terms of depersonalizing the feedback? Because, you shared way back doing collections calls and getting that to now getting really important feedback. But I think a lot of leaders, that can be a struggle. And I just wonder if how you have been able to, to depersonalize it, as you said.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's all that healthy, but I am excellent at compartmentalizing things. And I think this is just a skill that I've had for many years, where I can set aside things that kind of come in so that they don't hit me emotionally, because we deal with a lot of really hard stuff. And if you get it, when you hear it every single day and you read every report or every story, it will weigh on you, and it will certainly begin to impact mental health. I think it's impossible to do this job without feeling that. And so I think part of it is to, again, take the pieces that you can, and start to rationalize them, right? So that it's not overly emotional that I can't do my job, but also not so robotic, right? That I become just immune to people's pain and suffering, because I don't think that serves anyone, and I don't know who can do that. The other piece, is you gotta be able to take care of yourself, right? And take care of your team. And for me, what I learned many years ago was that how I show up, how I'm feeling, how I react to a certain phone call or a certain news article, and then my reaction to that to the team or or publicly impacts them more than I ever would have realized.
Mhm.
And so it's also just having the back of my mind, which I guess is an added stressor, right? But in the back of my mind, that my reaction, internal or not, is it might impact the team just as much as the action itself. And so always keeping that in mind. And so for me, being able to kind of put those in places in my brain to be able to continue to work is super important. And just figuring out how to have those other outlets. Personally, I have begun boxing, and that really helps get all the anger out. It's good to get that frustration out. I do that in the mornings, and then I'm zen for the rest of the day.
We won't ask who you picture when you're hitting that punching bag. How, you mentioned kind of thinking about your team, like there's a news article or something difficult out there. And how do you show up for your internal team in those moments?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important for my team to understand that I take every one of them seriously, and it's also important for them to know that what they may read is not always fact, and also that we have a lot of things going on in the background to correct records and things like that. But we're put in a really awkward position sometimes because we can't really respond, right? There are we are not going to we won't put ourselves or the people that we serve in a position to share their information publicly. That might be the one thing that the media needs to know in order to exonerate the Center for Safe Sport. But for us, that's less important, right? It's about making sure that we protect the people that we serve every day. And so making sure that the team remembers that, because it can be very personal. Not everybody has the ability to kind of put it in a box and keep it moving. It hits my team very hard, particularly those who are on the investigation sides of things, right? Whose work is maybe critical to an article, or if someone has something negative to say about an educational product that we released, it's personal to them because they put their heart and soul in it. So I think it's one about just acknowledging that and then keeping them focused on what we're there to do, and that is to make sports safer. And everyone in my organization feels that, and they're there for the right reasons. And sometimes they need a pep talk, right, to make sure that we keep focused. But also just acknowledging that it's hard and sometimes they just need a break. And so we try to prioritize wellness as an organization as well, because the secondary trauma of having to relive some of these things with the victims, with witnesses, can be very damaging. And we want to make sure we take care of them just like we take care of the athletes who give us a call.
Yeah, I think that's such a powerful message for leaders, Juris, because any leader who's faced some sort of external criticism, it's easy for that to kind of become a dominant force over a period of time, and the need to respond and defend ourselves. And what I'm hearing from you is sometimes you can, sometimes you can't, but rather than just focusing on what's my external response, thinking about what do you need to do internally for yourself and for your team, and to remind folks of the importance of the work and the values and why that external response may not even be possible because it would compromise the values that you have as an organization. To me, it's just such a good reminder for leaders.
Yeah, yeah, and it's something that it's easy to get mired in, right? It's easy to take everything personally. But if I did that, I wouldn't be able to get to the real work, right? And that would be doing a disservice to the organization and to the millions of people who count on us. And so sometimes you just got to push through, and it's hard, but I think it's worth it.
Well, to sort of shift to maybe a lighter note, it's an exciting year for sports with the Olympic and Paralympic Games coming up in Paris. And I wondered, how are you using this moment to connect with and empower athletes, and even connect with the public when there's going to be such a focus on those games?
Yeah, we are so excited to support Team USA this year. This will be the first time that the Center for Safe Sport will have a real presence and be in Paris with athletes. So it's super exciting for us. And it's also just one more thing to motivate my team, right, to own what we do, because this is the big show, right? And so for us, it's not only an opportunity to motivate my team, but it's an opportunity for us to remind the public that we are part of the Olympic and Paralympic movement. We help support athletes in a different way, right? We're not helping with team conditioning. We're not helping them get faster. We're not helping them, with medical stuff, but we are helping them in a different way, and that we are there to support just as any other organization does. And so one of the big things that we'll be focusing on is one, making sure athletes know, what is there available for them at the games. It's super important that athletes, particularly competing at this very high level, that they feel safe and that they feel their well-being is taken care of. So there are lots of organizations, the USOPC, the IOC, individual countries are really focusing heavily on mental health and support, which is exciting. And we'll be there to be able to help them understand, what if they need additional support during games or after games, if they'd like to make report, if they see something that's just not quite right. We also will be providing training to all of the volunteers on the ground that'll be interacting with Team USA, which is super exciting for us because we want to make sure that anybody interacting with the athletes understands what safety measures and protocols we have in place as well to keep them safe. And so we want to be able to share that, but also just use this as an opportunity to get our message out that we are here to support athletes in general. I think the world really is going to be focusing on the games over a period of 6 weeks, and we're going to be doing the same thing. And so it's a great opportunity to remind the public that one, yes, we are here to support athletes in their time of need, but we also are really focused on prevention education, and we need the whole world to watch this. We need the whole world to focus on this because there is so much overlap between our athletes and other countries' athletes, whether they're training or going to the games, that everyone who is interacting with an athlete should understand what safeguarding and what safe sport looks like. And this is an opportunity for the United States to really show what we've been doing for the last 7 years to the world. And it is really exciting for us just to even play a small part in this, which is super exciting.
Well, and you mentioned, showcasing what you're doing to the rest of the world. I think it bears repeating that, this is a first of its kind. I mean, we're the first country, the United States is the first country to have a Center for Safe Sport, but other countries are following your lead. And I know you engage with other countries. They look to you for expertise. I wonder if you could share some of the lessons you share with them, things that you've learned over the last 7 years as this organization is built up to be so large and effective.
Yeah, every country starts somewhere differently. Some of them focus on one or all of everything that we focus on. But I think that the biggest lesson that we've been able to share is just how to even just get the ball rolling. Unfortunately, the Center for Safe Sport was open in the wake of something terrible. And we would hope that other countries don't wait, right, for something like that to happen before they take action to really focus on prevention. And so really helping other countries understand and recognize it just because they haven't had a major issue that has been disclosed, right, in their country with their athletes, that doesn't mean that that gives them an opportunity to just sit and wait until it does, because we've seen how that happens. And so I think that's certainly the first lesson. The second is that you have to take time, right, and really understanding like what the needs are of your athletes in your country, but also recognizing that there are lots of stakeholders that are at play here, and that every country, every sport, is going to likely need something different. We've had the flexibility to be able to provide, educational content, policies and procedures, investigative practices for 50 plus states or 50 plus countries rather. And having to take that on has also taught us, the value of importance of working with law enforcement early and often, right? Helping them understand that part, the value of creating really strong or relationship with international bodies because there's going to come a time where you have to be able to share information. And so for us, it's about sharing what we've learned, but also some of the things that we had as missteps, right? And so that other countries don't repeat some of the mistakes that we made as we were just starting out. I mean, of course, funding was always an issue. Appearance of independence was an issue early on, and then also engagement of athletes. We started that too late. And so, we could be so much further along if we had done that on day one, right? And so really helping other countries not only see the successes that we've had, but also help them understand where we had our own missteps so that they don't have to repeat what the very hard lesson that we've already learned.
Can you share more about engagement with athletes and what you've learned from that experience? Because that seems like a really great lesson that you're bringing to others that are just getting started.
Yeah, when we first started out, we were really small and we really needed to get investigations up and running. And so that's where our time and our focus was. And we didn't spend a lot of time talking with athletes ahead of our opening to understand like what they would want to see out of a Center for Safe Sport. And so we started doing that much later. And I think if we had learned that earlier, we probably would have been a little bit better off. But also as part of our ongoing growth, right, as an organization, making sure that we build in athlete feedback to every part of what we do. So, in bringing them in when it comes to development of educational content, helping them provide or allowing them to provide feedback on investigative practices, right, and what they would like to see from a trauma informed perspective, understanding how, when, and where they like to be communicated with. That is super important. And for us, as we learn more about that, we're able to meet athletes where they are. And to become an organization that is not just this, scary organization that is investigating crime sometimes, right? But also an organization that is meant to really build up culture change and really hand in hand with athletes. And I think that part has been kind of eye-opening for me as a CEO and for our organization, because there were so many things that, when you're starting up a nonprofit, you're starting a new organization, you're running. And sometimes you run so fast, you miss things. And so now we've had an opportunity to slow down a little bit, and kind of assess where we could use more support and particularly and influence right from athletes, because, even though we serve 11 to 14 million people throughout this movement, small communities, people talk. And if we can get athletes to understand our process, if we can help athletes understand how we work and why, continuing to build that trust, that only strengthens us as an organization and our relationships with athletes. And that's something that we will continue to focus on, and frankly is a large part of our strategic plan moving forward.
Yeah, I think that's such a great lesson, to yeah, anytime you even think you're getting enough feedback from your stakeholders, we
We're
both
not.
probably can do it more, right? Yeah, we're not doing it enough, but there's more to do there. I know you've been able to even just see kind of out in the marketplace, as it were, what's happening and see conversations that sort of show that people are, sharing what you all are doing. One, if I remember right, is the equestrian community. And I wonder if you could just speak to that as one of the examples of kind of how your message is getting out there.
Yeah, the equestrian community was very vocal. Is remains to be very vocal. But when we first started, they were probably one of our biggest critics. And for a lot of good reasons, right? One, I think there was a lack of understanding of how we worked. And oftentimes and till this day, like when we complete investigations, people always want more information than what's given to them. And so they start to fill in their own blanks. And so the equestrian community was demanding answers. They felt that we were singling them out, right, in many communities, and they let us know about that, and they let their members know about that. And so, we slowly started engaging with them, one-on-one, working with their national governing body, but also hearing from athletes who had gone through our process to better understand how we could work with that community. We also did a lot of work around marketing and communications directly to them, identifying who the reporters were in those communities and helping them understand and kind of get a look into what the center was, and so that they could begin to report out more factual information. And as the organization began to embrace safe sport, as we began to weed out bad actors in the equestrian community, and that became more public, the tide started to change. And I would go to these message boards, and they would be brutal. I mean, just sometimes it was attacks on the organization, personal attacks. It was pretty terrible. But what we started to see was that people from the community started to speak up and said, no, this is not what the issue is. Here's what our issue is, and here's how we're going to fix it as a community. And we got more and more voices. They became louder and louder and started to really shift the tides in that entire community. Now, there's certainly still lots of work to be done, right, in all sports. But I think that what we have been able to do, and it certainly wasn't on our own, right? It was a groundswell of support and just knowledge sharing, I think, from the equestrian community that really, really pushed us forward.
Yeah, it just sounds like the listening and the conversations are just one important way to engage the stakeholders. And I was also thinking about the kind of how you're spreading the lessons internationally. And I know you all have done a lot of research, and that's an important way to, understand what works and then convey that out. And I wondered if you could just share what you all have found in your research that you're sharing with your stakeholders.
Yeah, so we're sitting on a lot of data, right? I mean, we've taken in so many reports over the years, and so it's really helped us understand what the issues are in individual sport communities, but also, what we need to do as far as preventing abuse. So that's been is a largely critical, and that again gets poured into our own educational content. But one of the things that we really are focusing on is, what the athlete experience is. And so we certainly hear a lot from athletes that go through our process, but we really want to know more about those that don't. And so a few years ago, we actually launched our first culture and climate survey to get a better understanding of athlete experiences throughout all sport. And we got a fairly good response from athletes of all ages who had participated in sport at various times of their lives. And I think one of the most shocking things that we found was that in 94% of the athletes that reported experiencing some sort of abuse, um, yeah, in some sort of abuse, 94% of them didn't report it.
Mm.
Right? And so we uncovered, and we kinda knew this, right, anecdotally, but we uncovered just some more, data to support that athletes weren't coming forward. And they weren't coming forward for a number of reasons. They feared retribution, they were scared, they weren't ready, they didn't think people would believe them, right? They thought might impact their career moving forward. And so, knowing that sort of information is really helpful to us as not only as we go out and talk to athletes one on one, right? And as communities, but also as we build educational content. And so this year we just launched a follow up survey to understand if that's changed, right? And so to see if the things that we have put in place, the things that governing bodies have put in place, are starting to move that, right? Because what we want is if people do experience abuse, we want them to report. But we recognize that reporting sexual abuse is hard for everybody involved. And so, we also want to just understand, like, if there are barriers to that, what can we as an organization do to knock some of those down, right? And so every year we learn a little bit more, but I think that was probably the most startling, and the one that we really kind of dug into because we don't want people to feel that they can't report, because what that does is ultimately allows, in many cases, for abuse to keep going. And at the end of the day, we want people to be safe. And so whatever we can do to, one, give people confidence to be able to report to us, but also break down those barriers that prevent them from doing that or for their friends from doing that, is really critical to our work.
Yeah, and I suppose that's why you have so many efforts now to reach younger athletes, to reach kids, to make sure that they understand, what's right and wrong in this case, so that they can speak up and that they're more comfortable reporting it when something happens.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, engaging young athletes is critical, right? One of the things we did early on was develop a suite of policies that every governing body is required to adhere to, and those have been adopted by hundreds of organizations throughout the country. And part of that is like helping people understand like what is okay and what's not. And so to recognize some of those red flags, right, and when people are breaking policies, because we know that if you're bending rules and then you start to break rules, that is typically where abuse starts to happen. And if we can get people to understand that and then report that behavior first, right, before it gets to a place where people are being abused, then we can really start to move the needle, and when it comes to prevention.
As you make decisions as a leader, I wonder if you could just share some of the values that you really hold up and rely on, because you have a lot of, you're dealing with a lot going on here, and as you have at your previous organizations as well.
Yeah, I think when I was thinking about preparing for this interview, like immediately my head went to integrity, right? It's probably the number one value. And integrity is a value that is part of our core values at the Center for Safe Sport, but also a personal value as well. Because, this job and this work in this world really tests you, right? And there are opportunities to cut corners. There are opportunities to look the other way. There are opportunities to maybe, go easy on people, right? But we don't take those shortcuts. We don't cut those corners. And I think as a leader, it's important to have the highest level of integrity when you're making decisions, not only for the work that we do, but also as an example and model for the rest of the team. Because I rely on, 100 plus people every day to show up and do their jobs the best that they can and have the best intentions, but also the highest levels of integrity and support that we can offer. And I think if you can't model that, then that's a problem, right? And particularly as an organization that was stood up to demand accountability, that's really, really important. And I think the one of the other things that I was thinking about that just kind of drives me is just also the accountability in itself, right? Just being responsible for actions, and as CEO, as leaders, like you got to also be responsible for other people's actions, and then being able to take that and really help that drive, future decision making, right? Because we all don't get it right all the time. The people who work for me are humans. We make mistakes, we mess up, but accepting that sometimes and just moving on, right? Figuring out how we can do better. And then really making sure that that's a value that I not only instill for myself in the work that I do every day, but also driving that with the team. Because it's a collective. And I think that, the team shows up well, particularly in those areas, because we know how much it means, because every case, every person we talk to, it's not a number. It's not just an allegation of abuse that comes in. It's a human being and it impacts people's lives. And we owe it to people to have it at the very top of our minds at all times.
Well, that accountability piece is, something that underpins everything you all do, right? Because the whole idea that our system, that young people are involved in sport and we want to make sure that they're safe, the system has some level of accountability, even if there's an individual whose actions, were, made a, that there was a case of something happening that shouldn't have happened, right? That we need to create a system that has a culture that will prevent that from happening in the future. And that's such a tough thing to do. I mean, it's a tough thing to, but it's so important. And you've seen such an influx of reports, which really is evidence that folks are more comfortable coming forward and sharing to change that culture.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, sometimes it's a little heartbreaking, right? Because we get so many reports in. But the way that I look at it is that means that those are people who are finally taking the leap, right? To make a report, or for themselves or on behalf of someone else. And that takes courage and that takes resolve. And so, I think we're gonna probably see more reports as the years go on. But it is, I think, a testament of the work that we're doing. And also it's a testament to the level of understanding that people in this country have now around abuse in sport, and being able to recognize that early, and be able to and actually finally have a place to report it. So it certainly keeps us busy. But I don't think it'd have it any other way.
Yeah. And as we wrap up, I wondered if you could just tell us, what can someone do if they want to learn more about how to spot and help prevent abuse in sport?
Sure. I mean, the first thing is, stop by our website, uscenterforsafesport.org, and we have a ton of resources that are available that focus on prevention, recognizing abuse, but also for different audiences. So, if you're a parent and you want to have a conversation with your child, and you're signing them up for, a new soccer club, or maybe they're starting gymnastics for the first time, you want to make sure that they understand also like what the expectations are, no matter their age. It's also a great place to stop by as parents to have some questions to ask for new coaches that you're hiring, right? You want to make sure that the club or organization that you're signing your kids up for, of course, does background checks, but also has policies in place to protect your children, that they're safe sport trained, and that they have a reporting mechanism in place. I'd also recommend dropping by our centralized disciplinary database. That's where we list more than 2,000 names of individuals who we have banned from sport. And so certainly a resource to the public that I encourage everyone to take a look at.
Well, thank you so much. It's not an easy task, what you're doing. I mean, I think any leader faces a lot of challenges, but in particular, from your experience taking super difficult calls at the Center for Missing and Exploited Children to now in your role as you're pioneering the work of SafeSport and how that is, the message and the research and the expertise is getting out around the world to make sport safer for everyone, but particularly, the youngest athletes. It's a bold challenge to influence stakeholders as various as the policymakers down to athletes in your family. And I just really appreciate you sharing some pearls of wisdom with us today, Juris Colón.
Thank you so much for having me. This was great.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Chief Influencer, a production of Social Driver and the Communications Board. If you know a leader who should be featured as a Chief Influencer, please nominate them at chiefinfluencer.org. For show notes and more, visit us at chiefinfluencer.org or follow Chief Influencer on LinkedIn. Until next time.